Hello, I am Dr. Layla Goshi with Baladi Magazine, and I am so pleased to welcome today P.L.Stuart, who is the author of the Drowned Kingdom Saga. And I want to say a little bit about P.L.Stuart. He was born in Toronto, Canada. He holds a university degree in English, specializing in medieval literature. P.L. is an assistant editor with Before We Go blog, and part of the Page Chewing podcast with Steve Talks Books and Made Between the Pages. The Drowned Kingdom Saga chronicles flawed and bigoted Prince Othrin's journey towards change and his rise to power in a new world after the downfall of his homeland, which is based on Plato's lost realm of Atlantis. The best-selling A Drowned Kingdom is mentioned in the esteemed Kirkus Magazine's 2021 Indie issue among 4 great examples of the genre of fantasy, and won the 2022 Picky Bookworm Award for Best Indie Book Based on Mythology. His new book, Lord and King, is being published this spring. And PL, do you have a date of publication of Lord and King?
Not yet. I'm actually just, this morning as we speak, going through some final approvals. So, but we're hoping within the next month or so. So it is getting a lot closer.
Okay, great. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to it. I have my theories on what's happening next, and just excited to see if those come to pass. And just real quick, I want to acknowledge Bjorn Larssen, author of Children, for the title of this interview. When I read his review, one of his main quotes, which is also featured on PL's website, is, "If reality came cloaked in high fantasy, epic world building, and compelling drama, it would be a lot like the last of the Atalanteans." And that's something that attracted me to your work too, which was the reality cloaked in high fantasy.
Well, I'd like to think, and thank you so much for the kind words, and special shout out to Bjorn Larssen, who is an absolutely brilliant author and a dear friend. And I was so humbled to have his endorsement quote on the front cover of The Last of the Atalanteans. Shout out to Bjorn. I think my book's my writing, my series is a lot of things, but yes, I would agree with Bjorn that, a lot of what I write is based on contemporary themes, not just contemporary themes, but themes that have perplexed and confounded us for centuries. And some of those themes are more contemporary than others, but at the same time, things that we've grappled with since the beginning of humankind. That's wrapped up in other elements of my writing, which I'd like to think hopefully are intriguing world building, and hopefully some thrilling battle scenes, and a lot of political intrigue, and some romance and other things. But yeah, in all of that are definitely some themes that I feel are much more about our everyday realities today in the 21st century. Beyond just the rest of the trappings that it would seem my writing is about.
And I want to pick up on that. One of the main things, as I've told you before, that I picked up on in the book is the journey of Prince Othrin, who is the main character of the series, and how he's having to grow after a significant change in his life. And actually, what I really like is in your first book, The Last of the Atalanteans, we get to see his homeland and how he lived, and it wasn't perfect. I'm sorry, The Drowned Kingdom is the first book. Yeah, The Drowned Kingdom. So we see his homeland, we see it wasn't perfect, we see he had, the same issues that many second sons of royal families do. And that, but then, are we doing spoilers here? I think.
Well, it's not a major spoiler, I think, based on the title, The Drowned Kingdom, as I always say, right?
So the kingdom drowns, and he becomes, he he has a lost homeland. And frankly, that's a theme that is very prevalent right now in the world. There are millions of refugees in our world right now. And I related to it really because, as I was telling you, my father is a refugee. So that was one of the first things I kind of hearkened in on. But tell us a little bit about your main character because while we might sympathize for that reason, there's other reasons we might not sympathize with them as much.
Yes, well, Arthur is, if nothing else, most people would consider him a flawed main character. He is, most people would say highly flawed. He is xenophobic. He's bigoted. He's racist. He's homophobic. He is misogynist. He's intolerant of other religions. As my good friend and co-host from Page Chewing Made Between the Pages, who's an exceptional blogger, says he's all the isms and the its that you can think of. So, in saying that, though, I believe some readers would find that he does have certain redeeming qualities. Typically, he's brave. He has a sense of honor and a code of honor based on, a rather antiquated version of chivalry. He is in his own religion, which is monotheistic, somewhat devout, and tries to be, hold to his religion and cling to his morals and his values and his ethics, what he considers is for the most part, at least when it's convenient for him. And he does care about children very much. He does believe in protecting what he considers the weak and the downtrodden. However, unfortunately, he is an oppressor himself. So there's a lot of hypocrisy and contradictions there. So, and I think more than anything else, you really raised some excellent points about his upbringing. He is someone who's conflicted and has a lot of, somewhat, emotional and or psychological, perhaps to some degree, baggage. When I say baggage, it's not saying that, it's something that, like we all struggle in our own ways with some of these things, but what he has, when I'm saying in terms of baggage, is things that prevents him, from moving forward. Some of these things prevent him from moving forward and becoming more progressive in some of his views. So he's carrying that around with him. He's carrying around the legacy of being part of a society that was considered peerless and at the upmost echelon of any society, and he was within that society, up at near the top of that society. So coming from a place of extreme privilege, believing that his society was the greatest in the world without equal, and in that, from that lens of privilege, feeling that anything he did in terms of any viewpoint he held was obviously the right one. Any morals he had, any moral beliefs he had were the right one, and that anything he did, if his kingdom, his empire, conquered other kingdoms, it was for their own good. If they brutally subjugated and forcibly converted people to their monotheistic religion, it was for their own good. So when you're coming from that perspective, you can imagine you have a lot of growing to do if you ever want to come to a place of somewhat more enlightenment and forward thinking. So.
Yeah. And that's why I think that this series is so topical and current, because I think we're living through, maybe humanity has always lived through that, because civilizations rise and fall, empires rise and fall, and the individuals from those civilizations, do have those perceptions, because what other perception can you have if you've been in your bubble, or if your society has been in their bubble for centuries, and then suddenly is confronted with other ways of living where people are perfectly happy as well, and so that can be a challenge to our values. And I feel like you've captured that really well. And I want to back up just a bit and ask a couple of writing professor questions for you. And So I noticed that you did study medieval literature um, for your English degree. Is that right? And so is this work a kind of an extension of that interest? Have you always had an interest in medieval works and sci-fi fantasy and things like that?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, my major is in English. My minor was in history. I'm a history buff, a history nerd as well.
Okay.
So that's where certainly the mythological element comes in, and my love of classics and Plato and Aristotle and Socrates and famous Greek philosophers and famous philosophers, ancient philosophers from all sorts of cultures and ancient religions, ancient cultures. Ancient Egypt, ancient Rome. Ancient Africa. Mesopotamia. I mean, you name it, and also um, specifically when it comes to medieval literature in terms of things like what it meant to be a ruler in that context, what it meant to be part of the nobility, what it meant to be a common person, someone who was a peasant, someone who was more downtrodden, what it meant to be to live in those societies and exist, and power structures, power imbalance, religion, all things that those are all concepts that fascinate me. So yeah, I'd say that very much my formal education played a part, but long before I ever got to university, I was a lover of the classics. I was a lover of reading about ancient civilization, ancient times, ancient warfare, ancient power structures, hierarchies, religions. So that was always something that I was fascinated with. I was very young. I read things like the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Morte d'Arthur. I read a lot of and of course Plato's Tale of Atlantis,
Mhm.
Paradise Lost. I very much was brought up on the classics. So and then of course more modern literature in fantasy fiction, Tolkien, Lloyd Alexander, C.S. Lewis, you name it. So, I read all those long before I ever got to school, and then later in life, well, more like for me now, midlife, because I'm in my 50s, so in my 20s, etc., late teens, other writers that were in the genre that were doing incredible things. Stephen R. Donaldson, like the list goes on. And now, of course, reading some of the fantastic authors who are writing, in this time, especially independent authors. But I'm not as widely read as I'd like to be. But being my age, I've read quite a bit of fantasy, and historical fiction is also a huge one of my huge favorite genres. So
Yeah. I feel like, especially in the reading, writing community, booktube, and so on, it's always, we never feel as well read as we wish we were because it's always a huge to be read pile. But I'm curious too, did you experiment with writing shorter stories um, before you started your novel, or how did that come about?
when I was younger, I used to write a lot of nonsense, trying to entertain my family. One maybe part of if you're I don't think I was such a bad kid, but then again, who does? Maybe a bit of the mischievous stuff. You get in trouble, and you want to write something funny to keep the focus off you when you're in trouble, keep your family entertained, and eventually they start saying things like, you got some real talent there. Obviously, your family's biased, but and then I'd write, little stories, but yeah, I always had a novel in my head as I started getting a bit older, even into my going into my early teens. I had this thing I was wanting to write a novel, and that
Mhm.
continued, but I never actually. I made attempts. I started and never finished, and I'd be embarrassed, obviously, to read some of those drafts now and some things that I wrote about, which were much more immature, but this kept going throughout my busy young adult life, where I had no time or energy or head space through my career and the early parts of my careers and raising families but later on in life, as I got closer to being an empty nester, and having more time, and you realize you get to that point, okay, well, if not now, when? as you get older, and now I'm in my 50s, obviously. So, but I'm a published author. My first book coming out in my 50s, my early 50s, and actually, I'm quite proud of that. But yeah, I'd always wanted to be a novelist,
Mhm.
and that's finally come to fruition. And I had the I had essentially the entire uh, bones of a Drowned Kingdom written by prior to being 50, but actually the bones of the entire series. But I decided to chop that mammoth thing up into 7 volumes, which is what this year is going to be, 7 volumes. Currently about to publish the third. So yeah, that's so it's been a long journey, and something that I mean, you get to 50, I will say, and you look and you go, okay, well, normally there's more years behind it ahead, and what do I want to accomplish? What would what are the things besides your children, in terms of a legacy that you'd like to leave behind? And I think I've talked about this on various podcasts that I think we're all chasing a bit of immortality as authors, and like maybe this is my piece potentially, right? So yeah.
Right, that's just excellent. And 7 volumes, I was excited when I first realized that because there's I think there is a lot more to author and story, and all of their stories, and I look forward to finding out what that is. So I did have a few other questions. I wanted to ask about it because something I've noticed, I guess, about Othran is that his family seems to offer different aspects of his conscience or his sense of values, so that even when he seems to be going off track, he, or let's say off track in his mind, away from his tradition. He has his wife Aliaz, who's very dutiful, and I always kind of see as representing, the best of his lost kingdom. And we had discussed a little bit how I had seen, what is his brother-in-law's name is Thurl.
Thorough, yes.
Yeah, and how Thurl, was always kind of watching in the background to make sure he doesn't cheat on Aliaz, or really cheat on tradition too. That's kind of how I took it. But then, yeah, your point that Glathan is his heir. Glathan is really is the one, his cousin as well, and he's really the one that is the visible representation of carrying on the traditions. So I just kind of like that, and I just wonder, what more you have to say about that.
Those are very astute observations,
Mhm.
Leila, that you're spot on. When it comes to Othran's family, and I would add in a few more members there. Yedwal, his uncle, who is essentially the embodiment of the colonial, superpower that is Atalantics, the embodiment of the colonial oppression, the best and the worst of the society, the snobbery, the belief in being superior over all of the societies, and also, and I guess in their mind, the chivalry and the bravery and the fidelity to one's duty, and and then the harshness, the potential harshness. His uncle Yedwal is very much, and Yedwal is very much a mirror, for Othran. Othran patterns himself in many ways early in his life after Yedwal, and sees himself, as essentially the inheritor of Yedwal's legacy in some ways, as Atlantic's primary warlord. That's what Othran aspires to be when he sees himself as, okay, what place can I have as the second son? I'm
Mhm.
not going to rule. What place can I have to make myself famous, to bring myself glory, as much glory as I can without being the king himself, because I won't be able to be that. So Othran looks to Yedwal because Yedwal has essentially had that place in their society, in some ways being more popular and well known than the king, however, not actually holding the ultimate power. Um, but you're spot on when you talk about the other members of Othran's family, who are very important. Glathan, his primary advisor, his cousin, essentially his best friend, often serves as his conscience, the person to really put him back on track in terms of leadership. And, Glathan's very benevolent. He's very wise. He has a very strict moral compass. He's very empathetic. He's probably one of the more empathetic and understanding characters surrounding Othrin. Probably someone who you definitely want as an advisor. Glathan's also very pragmatic and understands that sometimes, bad things must be done, for the sake of holding on to power, but tries to take, the softest path possible. Thurl, yes, Othrin's brother-in-law, definitely, more silent and more stoic and doesn't say much, but when he says something, you need to pay attention. And he is very much, Othrin's best fighter. And, he is, an extremely deadly warrior. But yes, someone who, while he doesn't say much, he definitely, when he does speak, he does represent someone who believes in, who has a strong moral compass and believes in fidelity to one's mission, fidelity to one's lord, and fidelity to one's spouse. And his sister happens to be Othrin's spouse, so obviously, he wouldn't want to see, Othrin betray his oaths to his wife. And Aliaz, yes, Aliaz represents what Othrin believes is the demure, proper, virtuous, yet, lovely and warm and desirable woman. The ultimate, what Atalantean women should be. Very ladylike, someone who would never embarrass you, someone who you can show off at court functions, and someone who will run your household for you very effectively. Someone who will only criticize you in private, never in public, will always preserve your image. Someone who's willing to, who will never really share the spotlight with you, will just be an accessory and is willing to be that because you as the king in their society, you'll always be, the movie star, and they'll always just be, a sideline. So that's something that Othrin, Alias has more metal than Othrin understands and realizes. Alias has a lot more, intelligence and determination and ability to, make decisions and make wise decisions than Othrin gives her credit for. He dismisses her in some way because she's a woman and Othrin is sexist. He's chauvinistic. He's misogynist, but at the same time, he underestimates his wife and he underestimates her value.
Yeah, there's some great threads to follow there, which I will in a second. One, just I recall that Prince Othrin did say in the Drowned Kingdom where Aliaz knows her duty, or he appreciates that he knows her duty. And I think I paid attention to that more, in terms of Thural keeping, being a little angel on his shoulder, which we'll talk about the angel too at some point. But, because, it's a love interest situation. So now he's met Lycia, is that right? And
Lycie. Yeah.
Lycie, and she not only represents a temptation, romantically, but also she represents another belief system. And so I saw that on two levels of he's not only being pulled away from his spouse for, sexual reasons, but also because just there's a whole other belief system here. And he does see the power of it, I think. So it's not so much about faith as power, maybe. I'm just kind of, saying that. But that's why I guess I cottoned in on that, because is he going to cheat or not?
Yeah. He and Lycie represents so many things. In some ways, she's the antithesis of what Othrin says he wants in a woman. She is masculine in terms of being a warrior, a formal warrior, a better warrior than Othrin. She is the antithesis in terms of being, in her society, women are allowed to hold the ultimate power. They're allowed to rule without a man, and that doesn't happen in Othrin's world. She is someone who is very willing to challenge and and stand up to Othran and his beliefs and his values and call him out on the things that she finds are hypocritical. She's just as ambitious. She can be just or even more conniving and scheming and capable of being ruthless as a ruler and doing the things that she needs to get ahead and hold on to power and increase her power, just like Othran is. So he finds that as much as on face value, he finds it abhorrent. He finds it extremely attractive because it's so different from any woman that he's ever met. And of course, she is extremely physically attractive, and extremely confident in her own, sexuality and her own position in society. And on top of everything else, she's a mage, so a magic user in her world, and that's also a struggle because Othran is not supposed to believe in magic. Magic is heresy; it's pagan witchcraft, and she isn't just any mage. She's a senior mage and someone who staunchly sees herself as part of the protective group of mages that essentially upholds the values and traditions, including the magic and essentially their religion, which they believe is a religion of the entire region of Elnia, in which Othran aspires to be a king. So, she's a very complicated person in Othran's life. She does tempt him in all sorts of ways. He doesn't want to be attracted to her. He can't help it. And he compares her, he holds up besides his wife that is seemingly everything that he's ever wanted and more. But then he meets this woman that should be exactly what he doesn't want, physical attraction aside, and he's completely drawn to her, and he's in trouble. You know.
And it's actually an extension of a theme from the first book, The Drowned Kingdom, in that his brother fell for a mage, right? And so he's confronting this now where he was critical of his brother and, actually was being set up as the kind of like an opposing ruler to his brother before the kingdom drowned. Now this theme is even closer in his life because it's happening to him. So I do see some kind of theme emerging. And maybe we can just leave that at that for the moment. But I love that. And then the other aspect of that, I think, is Saga, if I have her name correctly, the who is a queen, who does become a queen, and is also kind of rocking his world in that she is a woman who assumes power. And
Saida as Welly's wife, this is the first time Othran's had interaction with Lacey, and of course is attracted to Lacey, and but Othran finally, without too many spoilers, in the last Atalanteans, gets to see what it'd be like to actually see a woman physically sitting in ultimate power, as a co-ruler almost with a king, to see what that would look like and to see just how formidable someone like that would be. And Othran does see that. And, and again, without spoiling too much of the last Atalanteans, Side is a force to be reckoned with. So, and Othran's not used to seeing that from a woman, right? He is not used to accepting that a woman can be, that dominant and someone who he has to factor into his plans if he's aspiring to become this king, and there's certain obstacles that are in his way. Well, she's one of them. She's a major one. So
and it's kind of like he's coming into this realization. He's getting hit on all sides, poor Othran, because it's not that the patriarchy is power, to quote Cersei, power is power. And he's confronting his patriarchal ideas. And So that's one thing, but he is. I want to follow that other thread now about colonialism because one thing that Glaffin does is he tries to expand his mind about the kingdom of Anib. Is that right?
The Anab, about Anibia, the kingdom of the people are called the Anab. The realm is called Anibia, and or Southern Land, which lies across the South Channel from the main Crimean continent. They're
Yeah,
black. They're black people.
yeah, they're black, and he makes a statement like he does a kind of a smart like statement about he doesn't want them to put him in a cook pot or something. Whereas Glaffin is trying to explain their humanity, the benefit that they could derive from them, and just Othrin's not ready to hear that, it seems. And so that in conjunction with Yedwall, who, and I'm not sure if Yedwall ever had interactions with the Anib, I might be mistaken, but just in general, Yedwall has committed atrocities, which we find out very close to the end of Yedwall's life. He mentions this. And so, well, first, I think Yedwall, his whatever his death, however he died, I think his confrontation with the fact that he now was in the lands, or he's moving into the realm that he once conquered or he once savaged, I wonder if that was too much for Yedwall's heart, and it, it killed him. So so that's a very interesting theme as well of, I guess, the colonialists confronting their biases. And I don't think Prince Othrin is there yet with that situation.
Yeah, so again, without spoiling too much of either book, Yedwall is a colonialist and has Atalantics has subjugated several nations, especially one where one named Barefit, that the people there are analogous to a Middle Eastern type of peoples. And he has, he has his entire realm and the power structure has done some really brutal things over many decades. And the Anib, now we're going to flipping here. The Anib, Othrin has heard from so many people in Crimea that he trusts, and there's actually physical evidence in front of his eyes that the Anib had technological, at least a technological equal in terms of masonry and building and things as the Atalanteans. They were very adept with stone and so much of what still survives in Eltnia in its original form is from the Anib, who were the original colonizers of Eltnia. Now, Othrin comes there and hears all these things, and hears the Eltnish speak of the Anib with such worship, and hears of their history and their lush history and the rules. And Othrin, now hearing his uncle, who never met the Anib but has encountered other non-white civilizations and conquered them in his mind. His uncle's views are very prejudiced, extremely racist against non-white people and against non-Atalanteans. So his uncle's view of the Anib, he believes them as savages that would cook him a pot, is only based on speculation, what he's heard, what he believes, without ever having encountered them.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas Othrin goes to Eltnia and hears from these people, mind you, who he also considers barbarians, but these other people saying, no, the Anib are noble. They are an advanced civilization like the Atalanteans. They would rival the Atalanteans. They've built most of society years ago. They are there are people that we revere. And Othrin struggles with that and has a hard time understanding that and reconciling that these are the people that he initially rejected based on his people like his uncle telling them that these are savages running around in the jungle, and these are black people, and Othrin is conditioned not to trust non-white people in general. So yeah, it's quite an eye opener for him, to experience this. And when we think back, and again, without spoiling too much of the last Atalanteans, there's a struggle between even Othrin's uncle and Othrin in terms of sometimes they realize, in very small bites that they cross the line in their beliefs and things that they've done and the way they approach, their views of other people of different colors than them. So, but I don't want to get to spoil too much of that. But
I understand. I do want to clarify because I think I'd missed part of that. So the Anib had, in a sense, colonized a Crimea.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, the Anib were the original major colonizers of a Crimea, particularly Eltnia. They stayed, in the southern parts. The northern part of Crimea, Sanavia, which is more analogous to like a Norse type, more much colder, very extremely harsh winters. Think of Scandinavia, that type of thing. And then the southern part is Eltnia, which is much more the climate. We've been much more like a British Isles type of climate. But the Anib were the first main colonizers of that area. They came across from their lands across the Channel South, which is more, again, climate-wise, more like an African type, hot climate, and they were settled there. And then over time, and things happened that they left, and they left their colonies. But the colony of Barefoot, far away near Atlantis, in another continent called Atrimland, which the Atlanteans considered like the mainland. And again, the people of Barefoot, more analogous to a Middle Eastern type, culture, Middle Eastern cultures. They were a people who the Atalanteans looked at as less than people, just as they look at Black people less than people. They are people who we put under our heel because it's for their own good, and plus we want other resources, their gold, their etc. And we're going to convert them to our religion, and if they don't want to, we're going to kill them. That's they are that is the unfortunate point.
Which civilization is that? I missed that. The Middle Eastern religion.
So that's Barefoot. Barefoot is one of the Barefoot is one of the countries in Atrimland, which is a continent, near. No, it's a separate continent. Atrimland is a separate continent. Crimea is the new continent that Othrin comes to. Atrimland is a more ancient continent that the Atlanteans had considered to be like their mainland continent. Okay. And Crimea was like the new world kind of thing, right? So, even though it was long colonized and long, populated, right, in their minds, the new world.
Yeah.
So.
That's helpful because I think I focused in more on Othrin's experience and maybe more of the Drowned Kingdom, having just recently read the Atalanteans. So I'm still putting some things together myself. So that's really, really helpful to know. And it reminds me because in the real world, I've been reading about Timbuktu. I don't know if you've ever read into that, but there's a whole university there and just all kinds of things going on. And now we just really refer to Timbuktu as like this far away place nobody's ever heard of, out in the middle of nowhere. And so I kind of relate to that too of, again, Yedwall and Othrin sort of realizing there's this whole other thing going on, where they were not even part of, where people excelled and so on. So yeah, I really kind of relate. I mean, I think everything in the book you can kind of relate to some real world sociological thing that has happened. And so I think different readers will pick up on that in different ways, So,
yeah, and I just want to say I do have prequel trilogies planned where you will see much more of Atrimland, that continent, which has very diverse cultures, including Barefoot, and you will go back in time to see their evolution, and you'll meet ancestors of authors and their interactions with those cultures that I think people will find quite interesting as as uh, as
Yeah.
they see that. So
Yeah. So just curious, just overall in general, these are great themes. And, as someone, I'm in a diaspora from a, culture in the Middle East, but having been raised in the US. So I've kind of seen you can see things from multiple ways. And I get a sense that's how you see things too, from multiple ways. So was there a time where you kind of woke up to that, or is that something you've always kind of been aware of? Um,
well, everyone wants to think that they've always been open-minded and objective and tolerant and all these things, right? I think obviously I'm still learning. At 54, I'm still learning. I'm still growing. I'm evolving. There's so much I don't know. You realize as you get older, that's when I think it hits you how much you don't know, despite that you've accumulated a lifetime of knowledge if you've lived long enough. But I've always been fascinated with, especially the clash of cultures, the clash
mhm,
of religions, the inability for humankind to, effectively, to the degree that a lot of us would find ultimately harmonious, sync cultures, religions, beliefs, faith, non-faith. Um, you know, uh, we've done some amazing things as a human race, and
mhm,
yet we're still perplexed by so many problems that specifically center around our inability to truly appreciate each other's skin color, religion, culture, etc., right? And we've grown so much and evolved so much, but yet we seem to stand on the brink of annihilation, because of it's such a dichotomy, right? And that's always fascinated me.
yeah.
um as someone now who has grandchildren, I'm hoping that we figure it out, especially for their sake, because I look back historically, and you look at the Gandhis, and you look at the Martin Luther Kings, and you wonder what they would think, if they were alive today, to see the world that we live in, and to see to I wonder if they think that we've progressed as far as they would have thought we would have come in this amount of time since their lifetimes.
Yeah.
um, and that is something that I write about. Um, I write about a lot of these themes: racism, homophobia, colonialism, sexism, xenophobia, patriarchy, in a kind of gloves off way. You see it through the eyes of a main character. Perhaps, I mean, I'm not saying I'm so original, but I don't think you find a lot of books that you actually see it through the eyes of the person who holds these beliefs, and they're the protagonist. So kind of
Mhm,
like almost like the antagonist of they believe they're the protagonist of the story, but really they're in a way they're the antagonist. Um, so I wanted to bring the reader really close, and in fact uncomfortably close, to the someone who would hold those beliefs, sorry, and to illustrate whether or not that person could change. What would be the circumstances under which that person could change? To what degree could they change? Is change even possible? And most importantly, how would their beliefs and the things they're doing and the things they believe, and being someone in a position of power, affect a broad uh, group of people, right? And how do people who hold these views, that are in these positions where they can influence, affect policy, affect people's lives, when someone is like that, what does that do to others? What does
mhm,
that do to them? What does that do to the people close in their inner circle, and in the broad context of people who fall under their leadership? And what does that say about us, right? It's those are the things that I write about. So
I think that's great. I'm always mindful of like this balance of so many competing perspectives. And I think my solution has always been to kind of focus on the idea of free speech or academic freedom, or freedom to explore themes such as this. And But I've also encountered situations. We've probably seen this in the news quite a bit, or on social media, where someone will publish a book about, say, a different culture, and then everyone says, "Oh no, you can't write about that. Why did they publish that?" Or even some people getting turned down by publishers because they're not considered an authentic voice. And so I do think there's always room for criticism. I mean, if you put an idea out, you should be ready for critique. I think it's the censorship sometimes that I wonder about. And so I just kind of wanted to get your take on that, because you are actually writing about Authren, who is a bigoted person toward Black people, but really toward everybody too. So, just what are your thoughts? Is that why you went the indie route? Just questions like that.
Well, first of all, I Authren himself, the character, is an amalgam and composite of many people that I've met in my lifetime, people that I've heard about, people that I've read about the history, people that are currently living today, various, people in all kinds of positions, whether they be, leaders, world leaders, political figures, etc., right? And historical figures that existed. So, in saying that, I am a racialized person. So, whether that gives me an entitlement to write about racism, I can't tell you. All I can tell you is that, I have experienced it. My friends and family members have experienced it. Friends of different races have experienced it. My friends that are from the LGBTQA plus community have experienced, bigotry against them. I have family members who've experienced, female family members experienced misogyny and sexism. So I'm only writing from my lens, right? My limited flawed lens in my bubble, right? But I think, it's not up to me to say whether or not I have an entitlement to do that. It's up to my readers and the people who read my books to, believe and hopefully trust in my credibility as a person who has experienced that, and to for them to decide whether or not I've handled those topics sensitively enough and adroitly enough that, it conveys a genuine desire to address the issues in a way that upholds the dignity of not only, the people that I'm speaking about, who are the victims of this sort of thing, but frankly of the people who hold these views. Because I think what the issue is that, we're not trying to, these are abhorrent, horrible views that that can damage lives, ruin lives, destroy lives. You
Mm.
know, but I think what we have to realize is that, there are degrees of this as well, and there are people who hold these views that could potentially be have be salvaged in terms of their outlook, that could make a real impact in terms of change and helping to usher in the kind of change we're all looking for. And there's people that aren't. But my question is, Alden, what do you do with these people? Is it education? Is it like, do you just write them off? Is it, and people are different, and there are degrees by which people hold these views, and that's a very complicated and complex question when it comes to things like culture appropriation,
Mhm.
right? Because it's all about, not giving the culture the respect, and credit, that they deserve, right? And, it's often a result of colonization, where, one group claims the ownership of a land and its people, and they're stealing aspects of the other culture that just basically, reinforces oppression, reinforces dominance, reinforces disadvantages. So, but that said, again, when we talk about writing from a perspective, is it all right to write from the perspective of, or speak on with some sort of authority on a culture that essentially is not your own? that's a complicated question. What I will say is this: we also have to parse by what degrees, how much are you doing it? What is your background? For example, if you are someone who is white and you're married to someone who is black, and your children are mixed, and you lived in a predominantly black country for most of it, does that entitle you to write about blackness? I don't know, right? You have your experiences. And again, I think it comes down to, the sensitivity to which you're writing, the amount of input you're getting from people who are living those experiences. Um, what your where your heart is when you're writing this thing. Are your intentions, good, noble? There's a lot of things wrapped up into that, right? Um, but you don't have to, indie writing is phenomenal, to address your other question, in that, yeah, we kind of have a pulpit to almost write what we want, that they're, other than to address the commercial aspect of writing that traditional publishing companies perhaps might be hamstrung. But let's not forget, and this is something I want to remind people. Like, there's people, for example, like N.K. Jemisin, who's one of the most celebrated and decorated sci-fi fantasy authors of our time, who writes very openly about these things and is a best-selling author of works that, I read her last book, one of her not one of her last book, one of her recent books, The City We Became, that is, calling out specifically, for example, H.P. Lovecraft, who was, by I think many people's definition, an iconic writer, but had absolutely abhorrent views.
Mhm.
And N.K. Jemisin, essentially, she goes right after H.P. Lovecraft in about, about the concepts that he espouses, right? And, like, I think literature is a tool and a medium by which writers can speak on all kinds of subjects. But I
Mhm.
think it's what your intentions are, why you're speaking about something, the degree of effort you put into trying to speak on a subject, from a position of caring, love, wanting to do the right thing. Your morals, your ethics, those things all play a part. But you also have to realize that, yeah, you can unintentionally do things, and sometimes people intentionally do things. I think those are the things that matter when it comes to, writing and what you write about and how you approach your writing in terms of dealing with sensitive topics. Keep in mind as well that what you write about, some people may not want to listen to, not because they don't care about some of these themes, not because it doesn't bother them, not because they don't feel it's not right to hold those views, because they want to read and they want to be entertained and they want to escape, and they don't want to think about, these things that they're grappling with in the real world. And
Mhm.
I get that, I respect that, right? And, just like knowing that my book is not going to be for everyone, specifically because they don't want to hear about it. They may be someone who's, a frontline advocate, for all, against all these things. They may have protested the next day. They may have marched in a Me Too march, or marched in a Black Lives Matter march, or whatever, but they don't want to read about it in their fiction. And I respect that, because they want to escape from it. I totally get that. But there's some people who want to read about it, and some people who find it, they want to include that in what they read in terms of fiction, and I respect that too. And I guess, but again, I think it's all about, as an author, your credibility from which you write, the
Mhm.
perspective from which you write, what your intentions are. That doesn't mean that you should be able to stand criticism as an author in general, including whether or not you essentially have a right to write about certain things. And you shouldn't be upset about that, because, everyone has opinions; they're entitled to them. And we also have to look at the intent of the people who are giving you this criticism. Is because they're extremely outraged that they feel that you've appropriated, you're appropriated their culture. That's something that you need to take seriously. So.
Mhm. I mean, you're bringing up great points. I think this is such a dynamic conversation, because personally, I really do come from the point that anybody should be able to write about anything, but I do, yeah, I mean, you make a great point about responsibility, often, often authentically portraying what you're trying to portray. And I have had my quibbles with, well, more than quibbles with, with some books that, yeah, appropriate an entire culture and maybe misrepresent it, and but this, yeah, it's just a very interesting, complex question. I could probably go back and forth on it all day, and maybe we need to have a whole conversation just about that sometime with some other authors, because I think this is out there in the publishing world and also in the activist realm, and I think those who are activists for certain causes probably do, they have their reasons for protecting their, you know, for protecting people. Um, but I definitely, I just wanted to ask that because the Drowned Kingdom, I think, brings up so many different issues worth exploring, and that was just a dynamic I wanted to ask about as well.
Yeah, and I want to be clear that, and I've said this on various podcasts, I'm not smart enough to have the answers to any of these questions. And but I believe that it starts with looking at them boldly in the face, confronting them, and us as a species tackling these questions. It's not for one person, But I think the other thing I feel is that in my mind, although I totally respect people who don't want to read about this, even if these are the things that are near and dear to their heart, that I believe it needs to be kept in the public consciousness through literature, in order for us not to forget, um, you know, because it's easy for us to forget because we get caught up in our own lives, we get caught up in our own problems, we get caught up in,
Yeah.
we're not always looking globally. Understandably, we have to look micro. But I mean, then if we turn around later on and go, oh my gosh, this is such an issue. Why is this such an issue? We have to remember that, I think it's something that needs to be talked about, discussed, and something that needs to be in some ways pervasive in terms of how we attack, um, you know we attack these issues, right? That it has to be in the consciousness, and what better venue than the literary world, right? To write about that. And again, I have some writer friends that write about such amazing, incredibly important topics, and they use their books as a vehicle to do that. And I have so much respect for them, and and I think it's important. I think we need both kinds of literature. We need literature that's strictly to entertain, and we need literature that is there to hopefully educate, inform, or at least discuss things. Even uncomfortable things, but things that we need to deal with. So
And I think fantasy and sci-fi has, that's a thread that has been happening. I mean, I think you can find it in Tolkien with his multiple peoples, coming together. But Star Trek is another example of a future that is post-racial and post-alien and whatever else. And even Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. I made a special note of that because I think that's the first time I noticed, and that's by Tad Williams, but that's the first time I noticed where like indigenous people were included in, even though they were fantasy indigenous people, but they were others, they were other people in the story, but they were not like, well, no, they were even participants in the story. So the point is that I think your work is kind of the next wave of that, if that makes sense. So where we're kind of turning all that on its ear, and thinking about how do we get to the world of Star Trek? How do we get there? We get there through authoring. I don't know. That's just my sort of thought process on, you know, putting
well,
in broader themes.
No, and that's excellent. And I guess the thing we need to remember is that even the world of Star Trek had problems, and
Mhm.
they ended up confronting a lot of the same problems we're talking about. Now, you're talking about as in the context of a whole galaxy and other galaxies that and again, these are issues that have confounded many of them humankind for centuries as long as we've been in existence. So perhaps we're being arrogant and thinking that they're going to be resolved, not just in our lifetimes, but in the lifetimes of our great great grandchildren. Perhaps not, but I think the struggle is worthy, right, to try
Mhm.
and address them, and I think it's something worth talking about and writing about. So
Yeah, I did, just to follow up on that, I did always think of, maybe this is naive, I thought of Star Trek as sort of anti-colonial because of the, do not interfere. What's the prime directive? I forget again.
yeah, it's essentially non-interference, right?
Non-interference, yeah. But then Kirk always found a way to interfere anyway. So, yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah, I just want to see if I just have any other questions for you. So, because I'm an aspiring novelist myself, so
Yes.
what
Congratulations.
advice do you have for aspiring novelists, writers?
Well, I'm certainly fairly new in the game myself. I have two published books out and a third on the way, so I always feel like I mean, people to advice. I don't know if I'm qualified necessarily, but I will say this: is more inspiration than advice. That keep going. However you're planning to publish your work, if you're pitching, if you're querying to get an agent, and then to get a book deal, whether with a hybrid publisher or Big Five or whatever, keep going. Don't give up. Just do everything you can in your power to make that happen. If you're self-publishing, we know it's expensive. It can be expensive. Do what you can. Keep going. Just the point is, get that book out. Get that
Mhm.
short story, that novella, whatever you are writing. Get it out. Get it out there and learn from it. Get feedback, criticism, obviously editing all that before that, bay readers, alpha readers, all that before that. But there will come a time where you feel it's ready to publish it. Publish it. Learn, listen to the criticism. I mean, there's that balance between, not being tone deaf to your readers. If you see something very consistently, readers are saying constantly about your work that you feel you need to address it, but yet have the confidence that, hey, some of these things, there may be a case where, if it's maybe perhaps just one reader that's identifying it, not that it can be correct, but you also have to have confidence in your work that you're writing for your audience, and maybe this person just isn't your audience. So, go out, write, get your body of work going, and and keep writing because this is the way you're going to be improved. You need to keep writing because the only way you're going to improve as a writer, become the kind of writer that you are striving for, is to keep writing, keep making mistakes, not writing the perfect novel, because that's what you're aiming for. Because if you keep going, then one day you'll probably write it, right? So that's my if you want to call it advice, is just don't give up, persevere, don't give up.
That is wise advice. I give that advice to others. I need to apply it to myself too. But I do think that is great advice. And I am looking forward to reading your next book, Lord and King. I want to bring the screenshot up from your website, and I'll have your website link below. But it
Thank you.
is P.L.Stuart.com. Is that right?
Yep, www.P.L.Stuart.com. The Lord and King, the third book, is coming out in the next month or two. So Author's journey continues. Third book of a 7-book saga entitled the John Kingdom Saga. Right now, advanced reviews have gone out, and so far I'm grateful that they've been very positive. I'm honored to have Jenny Wirtz, who is a iconic author and my favorite author. I'm so blessed to have her endorsement quote on the front cover, as you can see there. And on the back cover, I have endorsement quotes from three brilliant authors. Eve Kojus, who is multi-award winning author, Holly Tinsley and Tim Hardy. All three of them, dear friends, Holly Tinsley and Tim Hardy, who were finalists in last year's iteration of the self-published fantasy blog off. So very, very talented writers who have again, I'm blown away that they're willing to read my book and that they liked it enough to put their name behind it. So I'm very grateful. So thank you.
That's wonderful. And I'm starting to read Jenny Wirt's first book right now. So hopefully after this weekend, I'll get a start so we can discuss that, coming up in April on Steve Talks Books. Yes.
Yeah, she
All
is
right.
an amazing author, incredible, incredible author. One, just an icon. So
Well, this has been a very enlightening, wonderful conversation, and to be continued because I can't wait to read Lord and King and then bring you
thank you,
back to talk a little bit more about everyone's journey in this book. So I want to thank you and thank everyone who's here and have a great day.
thank you so much, everyone, and thank you, Layla. I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.